The weight of their assumptions. The security line stretched endlessly before Mia Chen, a serpentine river of exhausted travelers clutching their boarding passes like lifelines. She stood there in her worn leather jacket and faded jeans, her single carry-on bag modest, against the parade of designer luggage around her. The fluorescent lights of LaGuardia Airport cast everyone in the same harsh, unforgiving glow, but somehow she felt it more acutely today. Perhaps because 20 feet ahead, her father and stepsister were making a show of their first-class priority boarding. Mia, her father's voice cut through the ambient noise, sharp with surprise and something else. Disappointment, maybe. Richard Chen had always worn his emotions like expensive accessories, visible to anyone who cared to look. "What are you doing here?" She shifted her weight, the familiar knot forming in her stomach. 3 years. 3 years since she'd seen them, and this was how it started. Flying to Seattle, same as you, apparently. Layla's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. Her stepsister had perfected that sound in the 2 years after Mia's mother died, when Richard had remarried with unseemly haste. "Oh my God, are you in economy? Still?" The words hung there, each one a small blade. Still. As if her life was a continuation of some failure they'd all agreed upon. "I see you haven't changed," Richard said, his gaze traveling from her scuffed boots to her untamed hair, still insisting on this, whatever this is, this rebellion. "It's called living my own life, Dad." "Is that what you call it?" He adjusted his Hermes tie, a nervous habit she remembered from childhood. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still playing at being something you're not. How's that little startup of yours? Still pretending you can make it without the family business?" The family business, Chen Industries, the kingdom she was supposed to inherit before Layla appeared with her MBA and her perfect smile and her way of making Richard forget he'd ever had another daughter. The betrayal still burned, but differently now. Like an old scar that only ached when it rained. "We're doing fine," Mia said quietly. "Fine." Layla repeated the word like it tasted bad. "Mia, there's no shame in admitting you were wrong. Daddy would probably even give you a job. Maybe in accounting? Something suitable for your skills." A businessman beside them glanced over, clearly enjoying the drama. Mia felt heat rise to her cheeks. This was why she had avoided them. This casual cruelty, this need to diminish her choices, her life, her very existence. "I don't need a job, Layla." "Of course not," Richard interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're too proud, just like your mother. Too proud to accept help, too proud to admit when you're drowning." The mention of her mother made her hands clench. Her mother, who died thinking Mia would be taken care of, who'd never known how quickly Richard would replace them both. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice interrupted, "we're now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 447 to Seattle." "That's us," Layla said brightly, hooking her arm through Richard's. "Enjoy your middle seat, Mia. I hear they don't even serve real food back there anymore." They moved toward the gate, their laughter trailing behind them like exhaust fumes. Mia stood frozen, aware of the pitying looks from other passengers. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. Any minute now. "Miss Chen?" She turned to find a uniformed officer standing behind her, his expression professional but warm. "Yes?" "I'm Captain Morrison from Atlas Private Aviation. Your jet is ready for departure whenever you are. I apologize for the delay. We had to wait for clearance from tower control." The security line fell silent. Mia could feel dozens of eyes on her, but she only cared about 2 pairs. Richard and Layla had stopped mid-stride, turning back with expressions of pure disbelief. What?" Layla's voice cracked. "My jet," Mia said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I don't fly commercial anymore," Captain Morrison continued, oblivious to the family drama unfolding. "The Gulfstream G650 is fueled and ready. Your pilot mentioned you have a board meeting immediately upon arrival. We've arranged for ground transportation at Boeing Field." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You own a private jet, among other things. Mia shouldered her bag, nodding to the captain. Thank you, Captain Morrison. I'm ready. As she walked past her family, past the first-class line, past everything they thought they knew about her, Mia felt something shift. The weight she'd carried for 3 years didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else, something that propelled her forward instead of holding her back. Mia, wait, Richard called out, but she didn't stop. The private terminal was a different world. Soft lighting, leather chairs, the quiet hum of efficiency. Her pilot, James, greeted her with a familiar smile. Good morning, Miss Chen. Smooth flight ahead. We should have you in Seattle by noon. She settled into the cream-colored leather seat, the cabin's silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the main terminal. But 5 minutes into takeoff, as the New York skyline shrank below, her phone rang. Richard. Of course. She almost didn't answer. Then, remembering her therapist's words about closure, she accepted the call. How? His voice was strangled. How is this possible? You left with nothing. You refused the severance package, the connections, everything. How do you have a private jet? I didn't leave with nothing, Dad. I left with my integrity. Don't give me that philosophical bullshit, Mia. You were a junior developer. You were nobody without Chen Industries. I looked out the window at the clouds below, each one catching the morning light like spun gold. That's where you're wrong. I was nobody at Chen Industries. The moment you chose Layla to be your successor, the moment you told the board I was too emotional to lead, that's when I became nobody in your world. I never said, December 15th, 3 years ago, board minutes, page 12. While Mia shows potential, she lacks the necessary ruthlessness for corporate leadership. My recommendation is to transition her to a support role while grooming Layla for succession. Silence. I could hear his breathing, rapid and shallow. You memorized the board minutes? I memorized the moment my father stopped believing in me. Mia, you have to understand. Layla had the education, the connections, the wedding ring that made her your daughter. The words came out harder than I intended. Well, I was just the reminder of Mom. That's not fair, isn't it? You remarried 6 months after Mom died. 6 months, Dad. I was still wearing black and you were picking out wedding colors. Your mother was gone. I was lonely. I was 17. I was lonely too. The admission hung between them, carried by satellite signals across miles of empty sky. I heard him swallow, heard the crack in his armor. The business needed stable leadership, he said finally, retreating to safer ground. The board was nervous about succession. Layla brought stability. And I brought what? Chaos? You brought uncertainty. You were always so independent, so determined to do things your way. The business world doesn't work like that, Mia. You have to play the game. I laughed, surprising myself with its genuineness. You're right. I don't play the game. I changed it. What does that mean? It means I stopped trying to live by your definition of success. I stopped believing that the only way to matter was to inherit something someone else built. So what? You won the lottery? Married rich? What aren't you telling me? The assumption that her success had to come from someone else, that she couldn't have possibly earned it herself, should have stung. Instead, it just confirmed what she'd always known. In Richard Chen's world, women didn't build empires. They inherited them or married into them. I built something, Dad, from scratch, without your name, without your connections, without your money. Built what? She hesitated. Part of her wanted to protect this last secret, to keep her success separate from their toxicity, but another part, the part that was still 17 and grieving and desperate for approval, wanted him to know. Monrovia Systems. The silence stretched so long, she wondered if the call had dropped. Then a strangled sound. You're lying. Why would I lie? Monrovia Systems is valued at $8 billion. They just got the Pentagon contract. They're revolutionizing cybersecurity. You can't be the founder, CEO, majority shareholder. She kept her voice level, professional, the same tone she used in board meetings when men twice her age questioned her decisions. I'm all of those things. But, but how? You were nobody. You were just a junior developer who couldn't even what? Accept being sidelined? Couldn't smile while you handed my future to someone else? You're right. I couldn't do those things. She could hear voices in the background. Lila's shrill demands to know what was happening. Richard muffled the phone, their argument a distant storm. I have to go, Mia said. We're landing soon. Mia, wait. We need to talk about this. The family, the company. We could merge, create something incredible. Chen Industries and Monrovia Systems together would be... No. You haven't even heard the proposal. I don't need to. I know how you operate, Dad. Everything is a transaction. Everything is about what benefits Chen Industries. But I'm not a subsidiary you can acquire. You're being emotional. There it was. The accusation that had followed her throughout her childhood, her teens, her early 20s. Too emotional, too sensitive, too much feeling, not enough thinking. It was the weapon he'd used to justify every slight, every dismissal, every moment he'd chosen Lila's calculating coldness over Mia's passionate intensity. Maybe I am. But my emotions built an $8 billion company. My emotions secured the Pentagon contract. My emotions changed the cybersecurity landscape. So maybe being emotional isn't the weakness you always said it was. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Beginning our descent into Seattle, Miss Chen. Beautiful, clear day for flying. I have to go, she repeated. The Global Innovation Summit is next week, Richard said quickly. Chen Industries has a booth, several panels. You should... I'll be there. You will? Hope crept into his voice, pathetic and raw. The primary sponsor, another silence. She could practically hear his world reorganizing, the power dynamics shifting like tectonic plates. The primary sponsor? That's a $10 million 15, actually. We increased it this year. So we'll see you there. You'll see me, yes. Goodbye, Dad. She ended the call before he could respond, turning her phone face down on the leather seat. Below, Seattle emerged from the morning mist, the Space Needle pointing skyward like an arrow of ambition. James's voice came over the intercom. Miss Chen, there's been a slight change. The board meeting has been moved up an hour. Should I notify the ground crew? Please do. And James, after the meeting, I'll need to fly to San Francisco. The team there is ready for the prototype demonstration. Of course, ma'am. Ma'am. She was 27 years old and people called her ma'am. Sometimes she still felt like that 17-year-old girl standing in a black dress at her mother's funeral, watching her father hold another woman's hand. But she wasn't that girl anymore. The story of Monrovia Systems wasn't one she told often. It felt too raw, too personal, like exposing a wound that had only recently healed. But sitting in this jet, flying toward another meeting, another deal, another step forward, she let herself remember. It had started with rage, pure crystalline rage at being dismissed, at being replaced, at being told she was too much and not enough simultaneously. She'd taken that rage and channeled it into code, spending 18-hour days in a cramped apartment, surviving on ramen and spite. The first algorithm was born from insomnia and inspiration at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. A new way to detect system intrusions, pattern recognition that learned and adapted in real time. She tried to explain it to a few people, but the response was always the same. Too ambitious, too complex, too risky. So she stopped explaining and started building. The first investor laughed her out of his office. The second one tried to buy the algorithm for pennies, planning to shelve it so it wouldn't compete with his existing investments. The third, a woman who'd built her own empire from nothing, saw what Mia saw. Possibility. You remind me of myself, Sarah Park had said over coffee in a Palo Alto cafe.
Angry and brilliant. It's a powerful combination if you don't let it consume you. Sarah's $2 million seed funding was the match that lit the fire. But it was Mia's vision that built the inferno. She hired carefully, selecting people who'd been overlooked, underestimated, told they were too something, too young, too old, too foreign, too different. Together, they built something that shouldn't have been possible. The Pentagon contract was the vindication she'd never admitted she craved. Standing in that conference room, watching generals and defense secretaries nod at her presentation, she thought of her father's words, "Too emotional for leadership." But emotion was what drove innovation. Emotion was what made her work when everyone else slept. Emotion was what helped her understand that cybersecurity wasn't just about protecting data, it was about protecting people, their secrets, their safety, their dignity. The landing was smooth, Seattle's rain holding off for once. The board meeting was a blur of numbers and projections, growth strategies and acquisition targets. Monrovia was expanding again, opening offices in London and Tokyo. The board wanted her to ring the opening bell at the NYSE next month when they went public. The valuation could hit $15 billion, the CFO said, barely containing his excitement. $15 billion, more money than Chen Industries had ever been worth. The irony wasn't lost on her. That evening, in her Seattle penthouse, Mia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights twinkle below. Her assistant had sent the schedule for the Global Innovation Summit. Keynote speech on Thursday, panel on Friday, gala dinner on Saturday. Chen Industries had a booth in the bronze tier section. She'd be walking past it on her way to the main stage. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but she recognized the writing style immediately. "Layla, I don't know what game you're playing, but you won't win. You were nothing before and you'll be nothing again. Daddy always said you were unstable. Genius maybe, but unstable. It's only a matter of time before you implode." She could have ignored it. Should have, probably. But something about being called unstable, that old familiar accusation, made her fingers move across the screen. Stability is overrated. Ask any innovator who changed the world. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. Layla had no response to that. The week passed in a blur of meetings and flights. By the time the summit arrived, Mia had closed 2 more major contracts and hired 50 new engineers. Monrovia was becoming impossible to ignore, a force that reshaped every conversation about technology and security. The convention center was massive, 5 floors of exhibitions and presentations. She arrived early Thursday morning before the crowds, walking through the empty halls like a general surveying a battlefield. The Chen Industries booth was exactly where she had expected, visible enough to seem important, far enough from the main action to be irrelevant. The banner read, "Chen Industries, building tomorrow's foundation today," the same slogan they'd used for 20 years. "Mia?" She turned to find her father standing there, older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper. He wore the same style suit he'd always worn, the same tie clip her mother had given him for their 10th anniversary. "Hello, Dad. You look..." He paused, searching for words. "Different. Successful. I am different. I am successful. I meant..." He stopped, started again. "The keynote. You're giving the keynote." "I am." "About what?" "The power of exclusion, how being pushed out of traditional systems forces innovation, how the people you dismiss today become the disruptors of tomorrow." His face flushed. Is that about..." "It's about Monrovia. It's about building something from nothing. It's about proving that emotional doesn't mean weak." "I never said you were weak." "No. You said I was unsuitable, unfit, too much of my mother and not enough of you. I was trying to protect you, Mia. The corporate world is brutal. I didn't want you to get hurt." She laughed, short and sharp. "So you hurt me first? That's an interesting protection strategy." "That's not what I..." He stopped, his shoulders sagging. "I handled it badly. I know that now. When Jessica died, I didn't know how to. You looked so much like her. Every time I saw you, I saw her, and it hurt. Layla was easier. She didn't remind me of anything I'd lost. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Mia felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of a knot she'd carried for years. So you replaced me. I thought I was giving you freedom. You were always talking about starting your own company, doing things differently. I thought if I pushed you out, you'd spread your wings. That's revisionist history, and you know it. He nodded slowly. Maybe, or maybe it's what I tell myself so I can sleep at night. People were starting to arrive, the convention center filling with voices and movement. She could see Layla in the distance, directing staff at their booth with sharp gestures. I have to go. Set up for the keynote. Mia, wait. He reached out, not quite touching her. Could we have dinner tonight? Just us? I have the stakeholder reception. Tomorrow then, please, I want to understand what you built, how you built it. I want to know my daughter again. The word daughter cracked something inside her. For so long, she'd felt like an orphan, despite having a living parent. Maybe. She said, I'll think about it.
The keynote was standing room only. 2,000 people packed into the main auditorium, with overflow rooms streaming the presentation. She stood backstage, her heart hammering, remembering every presentation at Chen Industries where her ideas had been dismissed, attributed to others, or simply ignored. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Monrovia Systems, named by Forbes as the most innovative company of the year, Ms. Mia Chen. The applause was thunderous. She walked onto the stage, the lights blinding, and for a moment she was 17 again, standing at a podium at her mother's memorial, trying to find words for a loss too large for language. But she wasn't that girl anymore. They told me I was too emotional for business, too passionate, too intense, too much feeling, not enough thinking. They told me these were weaknesses that would hold me back. She paused, scanning the crowd. In the third row, she spotted her father and Layla, their faces pale under the stage lights. They were half right. These qualities did hold me back, in their world. In a world where innovation is stifled by convention, where passion is seen as instability, where feeling deeply about your work is considered unprofessional. In that world, I was indeed unsuitable. A presentation slide appeared behind her, showing Monrovia's growth trajectory, a line shooting upward like a rocket. So I built a different world, a company where emotion drives innovation, where passion is our greatest asset, where the people who've been told they're too much or not enough come together to build something extraordinary. She talked about the early days, coding through the night, the rejections from investors, the moments of doubt. She talked about her team, the brilliant misfits who joined her crusade. She talked about the Pentagon contract, how they'd won by caring more, working harder, refusing to accept that good enough was good enough. The very qualities that made me unsuitable for traditional leadership, my emotional investment, my refusal to separate feeling from thinking, my inability to play the game, these became the foundation of an $8 billion company. The number drew gasps from the audience. I saw Layla whisper urgently to Richard, their booth forgotten. But here's what I learned, Mia continued, moving to the center of the stage. Being underestimated isn't a sentence, it's an opportunity. Every time someone tells you that you don't belong, they're showing you where the walls are. And once you know where the walls are, you can either beat your head against them, or you can build a door. The presentation showed images of Monrovia's offices around the world, the diverse faces of her employees, the innovations they'd created. We built a door, and then we built an empire on the other side of it. She talked about failure, about the algorithm that crashed and burned, taking 6 months of work with it. She talked about success, about the moment they'd cracked the code that would revolutionize cybersecurity. She talked about leadership, about how caring was not weakness, but strength. They say success is the best revenge, she said, moving toward her conclusion.
But I disagree. Success for revenge is hollow. It's performing for an audience that never believed in you anyway. Real success is freedom. Freedom from their definitions, freedom from their limitations, freedom from the need for their approval. She saw her father lean forward, his face unreadable. 3 years ago, I was told I wasn't suitable for leadership, that I was too emotional, too much like my mother, too unwilling to compromise my values for corporate success. Today, Monrovia Systems employs 3,000 people who were told similar things. Too young, too old, too different, too difficult. The slide behind her showed the faces of her employees, a mosaic of diversity and determination. Together, we're proving that the future doesn't belong to those who fit the mold. It belongs to those brave enough to break it. The applause started before she'd even finished, rolling across the auditorium like thunder. People stood, first a few, then dozens, then everyone. A standing ovation from 2,000 of the industry's most influential people. I saw her father standing too, slowly, like his body was fighting the motion. Layla remained seated, her face a mask of fury. Offstage, her assistant handed her water and her phone. Incredible, Miss Chen. Twitter's going crazy. You're trending. But she wasn't looking at Twitter. She was watching her father navigate through the crowd, moving toward her with purpose. Not now, she told the security as they moved to intercept him. Let him through. He stopped a few feet away, uncertain. That was remarkable. Thank you. I mean it. You took everything I said you couldn't do and proved me wrong. Spectacularly wrong. That wasn't the point. Wasn't it? At least a little. She considered lying, then decided she'd done enough performing for one day. Maybe a little. He smiled, sad and proud simultaneously. Your mother would have loved this. She always said you'd change the world. I thought she meant in small ways. Safe ways. Mom never did anything the safe way. No, she didn't. He looked around at the crowd, the success, the empire she'd built. I'm proud of you, Mia. I know I have no right to be, but I am. The words she'd waited years to hear felt smaller than she'd expected. Anticlimactic. Because she'd already learned to be proud of herself. I have to go, she said. Investor meetings. Of course. But dinner? Tomorrow? Please? She thought of all the dinners he'd missed, the birthdays, the graduations he attended for Layla, but not for her. The hurt was still there, scarred over, but sensitive. Okay, tomorrow. His face lit up like she'd given him a gift. Maybe she had. The rest of the summit passed in a blur. Panels where she shared stages with titans of industry, who now treated her as an equal. Meetings with government officials who wanted Monrovia's technology. Conversations with young entrepreneurs who looked at her the way she'd once looked at others, with hunger and hope. At the gala dinner, Chen Industries had a table in the back. Monrovia, as primary sponsor, had the table at the front, beside the stage. The physical distance between them represented more than seating arrangements. It was a map of how far she'd traveled. Layla approached her at the bar, several drinks deep, and spoiling for a fight. You think you've won, but Daddy will never really respect you. You're still the emotional little girl who cried at board meetings. I did cry at board meetings. When they cut the employee pension fund, when they laid off 200 people to boost quarterly profits, I cried because I cared. And that caring built something your MBA never could. You got lucky. One algorithm that I created. One company that I built. One fortune that I earned. What have you built, Layla? What have you created that wasn't handed to you? Her face flushed. I've grown Chen Industries by 30%, by cutting costs and selling off assets. You're not growing, you're cannibalizing. In 5 years, there won't be a Chen Industries left to run. You don't know anything about. I know everything about it. I still have friends there. They tell me about the fear, the low morale, the talent drain. You're managing decline, not growth. She raised her hand, and for a moment she thought she might actually strike her. Then Richard appeared, catching Layla's wrist. That's enough, both of you. She started it, Layla protested, sounding like the child she'd never stopped being. No, Richard said quietly. I started it. 3 years ago when I chose wrong. You don't mean that. I do. I chose the easy path, the familiar one. I chose someone who wouldn't challenge me, wouldn't make me feel less than. But that's not leadership. It's cowardice. You're drunk, Layla spat, pulling away from him, Joan sober, and seeing clearly for the first time in years. She stormed off, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Richard watched her go, then turned to Mia. I'm sorry. For everything. I know. Can you forgive me? She thought about it. Really thought about it. Forgiveness wasn't absolution. It wasn't pretending the hurt never happened. It was choosing to stop carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. I can try. They had dinner the next night, just the two of them, at a small Vietnamese restaurant she'd chosen for its anonymity and its memory. Her mother had loved Vietnamese food. He asked about Monrovia, and she told him, not the public version, but the real story. The nights she'd thought about quitting, the imposter syndrome that sometimes still whispered she was a fraud, the weight of 3,000 employees depending on her decisions. You're stronger than I ever was, he said over coffee. No, I just had less to lose. That's not true. You had everything to lose. Your confidence, your belief in yourself, your hope. I'm the one who played it safe.
And Layla, what happens to her? He sighed. I don't know. I've created a monster, I think. She believes she deserves success without earning it. You were right about Chen Industries. It's dying. Slowly, but dying. You could change course. I'm 63, Mia, too old to start over. Mom was 41 when she started her nonprofit. Built it from nothing to helping thousands of kids. It's not about age, Dad. It's about courage. He smiled, sad and fond. You're so much like her. I know. That's why you pushed me away. Yes, and that's why you succeeded. You have her heart and my stubbornness. Unstoppable combination. They parted outside the restaurant, awkward but lighter. He hugged her, tentative, and she let him. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. The flight home that night, alone in her jet, Mia thought about success and failure, about family and freedom. She'd spent so long defining herself in opposition to them. Not Richard's daughter, not Layla's stepsister, not Chen Industries' heir. But maybe that had been necessary. Maybe she'd needed to reject everything they were to discover who she was. Her phone buzzed. Sarah Park, her first investor, now her closest advisor, saw the keynote. You killed it. The internet is in love with you. The internet is fickle. Maybe, but you're not. You ready for what comes next? What came next was the IPO, the global expansion, the pressure of being a public company. What came next was harder and bigger and more complex than anything she'd faced. I'm ready. Good, because I have someone I want you to meet. Brilliant kid, reminds me of you 3 years ago. Angry and ambitious. She has an idea that could revolutionize renewable energy. Send me her info. Already did. Her name's Amy. She was just fired from her family's company. They said she was too emotional. She laughed, looking out at the lights below, each one a life, a dream, a possibility. Tell her emotional is exactly what we're looking for. The empire she'd built wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving Richard wrong or showing Layla up. It was about creating space for all the people who'd been told they didn't fit, couldn't lead, weren't enough. Her mother had always said that the best revenge was a life well lived. But Mia had learned something more. The best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was freedom. Freedom from their expectations, their limitations, their definitions of success. She thought of that girl at the airport, standing in economy line while her family flaunted their first-class tickets. That girl who'd been so sure she was nothing, worth nothing, deserving of nothing. That girl had been wrong about everything except one thing.
She'd known, deep down, that the humiliation wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. And what a beginning it had been. True victory, she'd learned, wasn't about crushing those who'd wronged you. It wasn't about making them regret their choices or beg for forgiveness. True victory was building something so magnificent that their opinions became irrelevant. It was creating a life so full that the empty spaces they'd left didn't matter anymore. Richard would probably never fully understand what he'd lost when he'd pushed her aside. Layla would likely spend years trying to diminish what Mia had built. But that was their burden to carry, not hers. She was free. Free from the need for their validation. Free from the weight of their expectations. Free to fail and succeed on her own terms. Free to be emotional and brilliant and too much and exactly enough all at once. The seatbelt sign turned off. She stood, stretching, feeling the satisfaction of a battle won. Not through destruction, but through creation. She'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their rejection. She'd turned humiliation into fuel, doubt into determination, exclusion into innovation. And she was just getting started.